Parents who treated me like crap suddenly want to visit me and told me they will be bringing a surprise for me as well. I told them to keep the surprise to themselves because I moved states 2 years ago and I never want to meet them again. Growing up, I always felt like a burden rather than a child my parents actually wanted. My father, a corporate lawyer in his mid-40s, and my mother, a real estate agent in her early 40s, were far more invested in maintaining their upper middle class image than actually being parents. They had me relatively young, and it often seemed like my existence was more of an inconvenience to their lifestyle than anything else. In our house and family, appearances were everything. My parents liked to project this image of success and stability, but behind closed doors, things were very different. While I didn't realize it as a kid, I know now that they treated me less like a daughter and more like an unpaid helper. Any achievements or dreams I had were either ignored or belittled. I'd bring home good grades or get awards only to have them brush it off, saying, "It's not a big deal, you're supposed to do well." Over time, it became clear that my value in their eyes depended on how I could either uphold their image or reduce their burden. But things really escalated when I was in my last year of high school. Out of nowhere, my mom lost her job. She never gave me a clear explanation of what happened, so I still don't know if she was let go or quit voluntarily, but she stopped working entirely. Around the same time, my dad was fired from the law firm he'd been with for years. Losing both incomes, their once perfect life started crumbling. They were struggling to keep up with the mortgage payments, bills, and all the other costs they'd been accustomed to affording easily. Suddenly, all their pent-up frustration, desperation, and financial instability were directed straight at me. I had been working hard in school, balancing my studies with a part-time job so I could save up for college and contribute to my own expenses. Eventually, I earned a scholarship that would cover most of my tuition, a huge relief given my parents' financial situation. But when I shared the news with them, expecting at least a small sense of pride or encouragement, all I got were questions about how that scholarship money could be useful to the family. My dad started dropping hints that I should stay home, give up the scholarship, and work full-time to help with financial burdens. My mom even suggested that college could wait and that a real adult would help out their family. The final blow came when I found out that the modest college savings fund my late grandfather had set up for me had been completely drained. They'd used it to pay off some of their own debts without telling me. When I confronted them, they had no apologies, just explanations about how it was necessary to keep our family afloat. I was devastated, and I remember feeling like I'd been cheated out of a future. They had no interest in seeing me achieve it. It became clear that, in their eyes, my dreams, my future, and even my well-being were all secondary to their own needs. At that point, I knew I had to leave. So at 18, I packed up what little I had and moved to a nearby city to attend college on my own. I worked multiple jobs to get by, juggling my studies with waitressing, tutoring, and any other work I could find. It was hard, but being away from them felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. There was finally a sense of freedom, even if it meant I had to struggle. I kept my distance, only reaching out on holidays or for obligatory family calls, hoping that maybe time apart would lead to some kind of change in how they saw me. Fast forward a few years, I finished my degree and received an offer for a full-time job in another state. The job was everything I'd worked for, with a good salary, benefits, and a chance to finally build a stable life. I moved again, this time hundreds of miles away, and started fresh. I felt so free to be able to afford my own apartment, to have friends who cared about me, and to finally live on my own terms. The dream had come true. For the first time, I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. Years had passed since that move, and I hadn't heard a word from my parents. I thought they'd finally accepted that I was done catering to their needs. But a week ago, I received a message from them saying they wanted to reconnect and were planning a visit with a special surprise for me. They kept saying that I would be so happy when I got this surprise and acted as though nothing had happened, like we were just a normal family that had simply lost touch. Their message left me stunned. Here they were, reaching out after years of silence, pretending as if they hadn't manipulated and controlled me all my life. They were acting like we had some wonderful family bond that could be reignited with a simple visit. They hinted that their surprise would make things right between us, whatever that was supposed to mean. Given our history, I couldn't help but feel suspicious. Every surprise they'd ever had for me was a way to guilt trip or manipulate me. When I politely declined their visit, they didn't take it well. I soon began receiving messages from other family members, all trying to guilt me into changing my mind. They said things like, "Your parents are reaching out because they miss you, and it's time to let the past go." Some even hinted that I was being too harsh and that my parents were only trying to make amends. It felt like everyone had conveniently forgotten all the sacrifices I had made just to break free from their control. The guilt tripping continued with messages suggesting that family is family no matter what, and that everybody deserves a second chance. But after everything I'd been through, did I really owe them another chance? I spent years carrying the weight of their mistakes, sacrificing my peace, my savings, and my dreams to help them maintain their perfect image. I had put my own life on hold just to keep them happy, only to be discarded when they no longer needed me. And now that I had finally built something for myself, they wanted back in. So here I am, torn between the family I was born into and the life I fought to create on my own. Part of me wonders if I'm wrong for wanting to keep my distance, for finally choosing myself over the people who only saw me as a means to their own ends. I know what my parents are capable of, and I know that this surprise is likely just another way to manipulate me. But I also can't shake the feeling of guilt they've instilled in me, the feeling that maybe I owe them something just because they're my parents. Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone for the outpouring of support, comments, and messages. It's overwhelming in the best way possible to hear from so many people who have been through similar situations and to receive advice from those who understand how hard it can be to set boundaries with family. Reading through all of your experiences has really helped me gain clarity about my own. Many of you pointed out something I'd missed initially, that my parents' whole approach to reconciling by showing up unannounced and dangling a surprise in front of me, especially a financial one, proves they still don't understand the impact of their behavior. If anything, it seems they still think of me as someone they can control or appease with money instead of addressing the root issues. After posting the main story, things actually escalated on their own. Yesterday morning, I got a call from my aunt, my mother's sister, who has always been more of a bystander than a supporter, but occasionally reaches out to give family advice. She didn't waste any time asking me why I'd refused to let my parents visit or what was going on. Apparently, my parents had confided in her about their plans, including this surprise they were so eager to spring on me. According to my aunt, my parents have supposedly been seeing a family therapist for the past year. They told her they'd been reflecting on how they treated me in the past and had come to realize their mistakes. The surprise they'd been planning was, according to my aunt, a trust fund they'd set up in my name using some of their savings as an apology and as a way to make things right. They believed this gesture could mend our relationship and that it would show me they were committed to change. Hearing about the trust fund just confused me. On one hand, the fact that they had saved up to create something they thought would benefit me felt like an acknowledgement of some sort, and part of me wanted to believe they genuinely changed. But then, as I thought more about it, I felt frustrated that their so-called reconciliation plan still revolved around money and grand gestures, the exact things that created the distance between us in the first place. It felt like they were trying to buy my forgiveness rather than work on the relationship through open communication and respect. After hearing my aunt's story, I decided it was time to address this directly. I sat down yesterday evening and wrote a long email to my parents laying everything out. I thanked them for the effort they claim to have put into therapy and acknowledged that it's a big step if they're really taking responsibility for the way they treated me. But I also explained that surprising me with a visit and using a financial gesture as a means of apology wasn't the right way to start rebuilding our relationship. I told them bluntly that if they were serious about moving forward, it needed to start with respect for my boundaries and a willingness to communicate directly about what happened, not by trying to buy forgiveness. In the email, I was very clear that I wouldn't be accepting any visits or meetings unless we first establish some ground rules. I suggested we start with regular phone calls or messages where we could both gradually build trust and discuss past issues in a way that feels safe for me. I explained that rebuilding our relationship would take time and that I needed to see sustained change, not just a one-time gift or gesture. I even mentioned that if their therapy is truly helping, they should know that reconciliation takes work, not just money or big surprises. After hitting send, I felt a huge wave of relief. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I was setting the terms of how this would go. The next morning, I received a response from my parents, and it was a lot. They were polite at first, saying they appreciated my honesty and were open to following my lead if it meant fixing things. But then, as the email went on, it was clear they were already backpedaling. My mother wrote paragraphs about how families shouldn't need rules or formal boundaries, and that if I truly wanted to make amends, I should have been more willing to let them visit and talk in person. My father's part was more straightforward. He felt hurt that I rejected their gift, saying it took them a lot of effort and that he felt disrespected by my refusal to accept their attempt at reconciliation. It felt like they were shifting the blame onto me, implying that by setting boundaries, I was the one refusing to reconcile. As if that wasn't enough, my mother also included a line about how I've always been independent to a fault, which stung. I realized then that they hadn't really changed. They were still framing everything as my fault, my inability to be family-oriented or forgiving enough. Reading through it felt like another slap in the face, as if they were ignoring everything I'd shared about my struggles and still twisting it to make me seem ungrateful. Later that evening, I got another call from my aunt. She had clearly spoken to my parents after they'd received my email and was now calling to reason with me, though it felt more like a guilt trip. She kept saying things like, "They're really trying, you know? It's not easy for them either, and maybe you're being a bit too harsh. They only want to show they've changed." She even mentioned that their therapist had apparently encouraged them to reach out and that their surprise fund was a product of these sessions, as if that somehow justified their entire approach. It felt as though everyone was trying to convince me that accepting their gesture would fix everything when deep down, I knew it wouldn't. By the end of the conversation with my aunt, I was exhausted. I was mentally drained from having to explain over and over that a one-time grand gesture isn't a replacement for years of genuine effort or accountability. I kept asking myself why they couldn't just respect what I needed. Why was it so hard for them to communicate with me directly and consistently? All of this felt like more of the same manipulation I'd grown up with, just dressed up in different words and actions. I felt like I'm being pushed into a corner. It's almost as though by setting boundaries, I'm being punished or accused of not trying hard enough to fix things. I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to be forced into playing the role of the ungrateful daughter just because I'm not bending to their version of getting back to how things were. And now, with family members pressuring me to change my stance, I feel like I'm back to square one, trying to defend my choices and my autonomy. After everything I've been through, I know I don't deserve this. I've worked hard to build a life on my own, to be free from the manipulation and control that defined my childhood. Update 2, I truly didn't expect things to escalate as much as they have in the past few days. After sending that last email and being firm about my boundaries, I had hoped that my parents would take a step back and respect my decision. But things have only gotten more complicated, and I'm starting to see just how far they're willing to go to reassert control over me. 2 days after my last post, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. It simply read, "Hope you're doing well in your new city. Don't think you can hide forever. We'll see you soon." My heart stopped. I immediately assumed it was spam or some random scam message, but as I reread it, something about the tone felt too familiar. It was similar to the way my father would leave me reminders or messages when he wanted me to feel guilty or anxious about something. I was trying to brush it off, but it definitely rattled me. Later that day, I received an email from my father. It was a long, formal-sounding message where he said he'd been disappointed by my responses and lack of willingness to accept their hand of reconciliation. He didn't outright threaten anything, but the language was pointed. He mentioned how I was their only child and that as their daughter, it was my moral responsibility to show some respect, meet them halfway, and at least consider their attempts to reconcile. There was also a line about how they had invested so much in my education and upbringing, and that now was not the time to repay them with silence and distance. Reading between the lines, it felt like he was implying that my success and independence were somehow things I owed to them, and it was my duty to keep them close out of gratitude. I was furious, but it also confirmed my fear. They weren't going to respect my space. That evening, I called a close friend who had known me and my family for years. She listened to everything and then calmly reminded me that my parents have always pushed boundaries, And this was probably their way of testing to see how much I would take before I finally gave in. She told me it was okay to keep my distance and that I wasn't obligated to let them back into my life on their terms, especially if it was causing me so much stress. I felt a wave of relief knowing I wasn't alone and feeling like their behavior was manipulative. But it didn't stop there. The next day, I noticed my parents had both followed me on Instagram, a platform I had used to stay connected with college friends, but had kept private without any family members. I hadn't blocked them before since they'd never used social media much, but it was unsettling to see them pop up now. Even stranger, I noticed my mother had liked some old posts on my profile, the last one from about 2 years ago when I first moved to this new state for work. It felt like they were going out of their way to leave a mark, like they were reminding me they could still keep an eye on me. That night, I got a message from my aunt again. She asked if I'd spoken to my parents recently, saying they were worried and didn't know how else to reach me since I'd been so closed off. She told me they knew where I lived and hinted that they were considering flying over for a quick visit to talk things out. My aunt played it off as if it was no big deal, saying they just wanted to set things straight and were only showing up to give me some clarity about their intentions. But the way she spoke made it clear that they had already made up their minds to show up. My aunt even added that I was overreacting and that this situation wasn't as big of a deal as I was making it out to be. The worst part of it all was realizing they knew exactly where I lived. When I first moved here years ago, I'd never shared my address with them, hoping for a fresh start without the constant worry of them interfering in my life. It struck me that they might have found my address through other relatives or maybe even through an online search. Knowing how persistent they can be, it sent chills down my spine to think they'd been quietly keeping tabs on me. I was horrified but not entirely surprised. Feeling on edge, I emailed my parents again, making it very clear that I wasn't comfortable with any surprise visits and reminding them again that I needed space. I explained that if they truly wanted to make amends, it would have to be done respectfully and without trying to track me down or follow me online. I thought my tone was polite but firm, hoping that if they read it carefully, they'd realize that showing up uninvited would only push me further away. Their response came quickly. My mother replied with a long, guilt-tripping message about how they couldn't believe I was treating them like strangers and how it broke their hearts to see me so distant and ungrateful after all they'd done for me. She talked about how families should always be there for each other and how they were just trying to support me in a way they thought I would appreciate. It was all framed as if they were doing me some grand favor by being persistent, and I was too stubborn to understand their love. She even said that someday I'd look back and regret pushing them away when all they wanted was to help me heal from the past. After reading that, I was done. I felt drained mentally and emotionally from trying to hold my ground and constantly having to explain my perspective. I took a few hours to collect myself and then sent one final message, firmly stating that if they showed up at my home uninvited, I would call the police. I made it very clear that I was serious, that this wasn't a negotiation, and that if they truly respected me, they would back off and allow me to live my life without interference. The next day, I heard from a cousin on my father's side who rarely ever calls me. She'd heard through the grapevine that I'd threatened my parents with police action, and she wanted to know what was going on. At this point, I felt like my life had become some kind of twisted family soap opera, with everyone getting involved and throwing their opinions at me. My cousin kept saying things like, "Your parents have been through so much, and isn't there a way to work this out peacefully?" I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like they were all reading from the same script, trying to guilt me into complying with whatever narrative my parents had spun for them. In a moment of desperation, I ended up going through my social media profiles and adjusting all my privacy settings, even going so far as to block certain family members who had shown an interest in meddling. I also decided to get a P.O. box for any future mail because it dawned on me that they might start sending letters to my home address if I continued to resist their attempts to contact me. One last thing happened yesterday that solidified my decision to keep my boundaries strong. I got a notification from my apartment's management office saying there was a visitor asking to confirm if I lived there. Thankfully, the staff member at the desk didn't give them any information, but the description sounded eerily like my father. I felt my heart race as I realized just how far they were willing to go. It was as if they thought if they just showed up, they could break through my defenses and convince me to let them back in. So here I am now, still standing my ground, but feeling a mix of exhaustion and fear. I spent years building my independence and learning how to stand up for myself. But this entire ordeal has made me question just how much strength I have left to keep fighting them off. Part of me feels a small pang of guilt, wondering if they'll ever truly understand why I need this space or if they're genuinely just lost in their own perspective. But then I remember the years of manipulation, the emotional blackmail, and the constant reminder that my life was never fully my own around them. Update 3. Hello, everyone. It's been almost a month since everything escalated, and thankfully, a lot has happened since. I have some good news that's given me a bit of peace. My boyfriend and I decided it was time to move into a new place together. We were planning this for a while, but after this whole incident with my parents, we just became more sure about it. We found a small but cozy apartment a few towns over that felt like a fresh start, away from the old address my parents had somehow tracked down. We finalized the move just last week, and while I'm still keeping my guard up, I feel like there's finally some space between me and their reach. It's a big relief knowing they'd have to work even harder to track me down again. Hopefully, they won't try. Throughout all this, I've stayed in close contact with my friend, who's been my sounding board through these chaotic weeks. She recently attended a gathering that my parents happened to be at as well. I wasn't thrilled to know they'd be in the same room, but I trusted her judgment. Apparently, my parents have taken their narrative to a new level. They've been telling anyone who would listen that I've abandoned them, that I am ungrateful, and that they raised me with nothing but love, only for me to walk out and disrespect them. My friend kept her cool at first, just listening to what they were saying without interrupting, but things escalated. According to her, they painted a picture of me as some spoiled, bratty kid who had used them up and left once I didn't need them anymore. They spoke about my disrespect for family values and how heartbroken they were by my refusal to forgive them. My mother apparently even went so far as to talk about all the things they had supposedly sacrificed for me growing up, spinning it as if I turned my back on my duties to them. I was absolutely disgusted to hear this. Everything they were saying was so twisted, such a warped view of reality. I'd lived through it. It hurt to know they were spreading this story about me to people who didn't know any better. But what else could we expect from them, right? But my friend didn't let it slide. She stepped in, directly called them out in front of everyone, and laid down the truth. She told everyone there about the years of manipulation and emotional abuse they'd put me through, about how they'd repeatedly dismissed and controlled me, used me for financial help when it suited them, and only turned to me now out of convenience. She brought up the fact that they tried to track me down, ignored my boundaries, and even attempted to show up unannounced despite me asking them not to. She didn't hold back on any of it. I was in shock hearing her recount it. She truly went to bat for me in a way I didn't even know I needed. The most surprising part was that my parents didn't deny a single thing she said. They sat there quietly listening, with only occasional mutterings of, "We did a lot for her," or, "But she's our daughter." Not once did they attempt to refute what she was saying. They didn't deny their actions or explain their side. They just looked uncomfortable and embarrassed. From what my friend told me, it was clear that for once, they were facing people who weren't going to automatically take their side. They couldn't control the narrative anymore, and I think it finally hit them just how much they'd messed up. After that, my friend said there was a noticeable shift in how people were interacting with my parents. They lost that social status they had once relied on. People who used to flock to them were now keeping their distance, unwilling to get involved in the mess they had created. They were left to fend for themselves, stripped of the support they'd always leaned on to boost their image. I didn't realize until then how much they valued that external validation and how important it was for them to be seen as respected members of the community. Now that they'd been exposed, they'd lost the facade that made them feel powerful and in control. Despite this, they didn't stop trying to get through to me. I received constant messages and emails from both of them, filled with emotional pleas and occasionally attempts at guilt-tripping me. Some long, drawn-out letters about how I'm breaking up the family, tearing them apart, and disappointing them in ways they never thought possible. They've even tried calling from blocked numbers, leaving me lengthy voicemails that I've stopped listening to altogether. This went on for a while. I decided I needed to take a stronger stand. I sent them one final email, a simple but clear message, telling them that if they didn't stop this harassment, I would involve the police. I warned them that their actions were crossing into territory that could be legally classified as stalking and that I wouldn't hesitate to file a restraining order if they continued. I spelled it out as plainly as I could, hoping that the threat of legal action would finally make them understand that I was serious about my boundaries. The next few days were tense. I received one last email from my mother, filled with dramatic statements about how they'd only tried to do what was best for me and how I was throwing away the only family I had. There was a brief line that I'm sure was intended to scare me, where she wrote, "One day you'll regret this decision. You'll look back and wonder why you couldn't just let things go." It was the kind of veiled threat that used to get under my skin, but now it only made me feel even more sure that I was doing the right thing. After that last message, things went quiet. I felt an immense weight lift off my shoulders as if I was finally beginning to reclaim the freedom I'd been fighting for. It was a strange feeling, realizing that they might actually be backing off. I don't know if they're actually done trying to reach me, but for now, the silence is a relief, and I'm taking this time to focus on myself, my relationship, and the new life I'm building without their interference. Reddit, I don't know if this chapter with my parents is closed for good, or if they'll try to find another way back into my life. For now, I'm content with the steps I've taken to protect myself and my happiness. It's been a long journey, one I'm still navigating, but I finally feel sorted and out of the whole family mess. Thank you for being here.